dear parishioners, parents and people of goodwill. We're on to the 16th Sunday Year A now. Just wanted to talk to you about Leonardo da Vinci. He was one of the most extraordinary people, one of the most diversely talented people of all of history. Born in 1452, and as many of you would know, he painted the most famous portrait of all time, the Mona Lisa. But one of his other great paintings, probably the second greatest painting of his, if not equal first, is the Last Supper, which has been reproduced more than any other painting in history. So that painting of the Last Supper is famous of his. And yet there's a fair bit of background to it. Initially, he's painted the Last Supper, and he took quite a while to paint all the figures. It was necessary to find men who could serve as models. Each model had to have a face that expressed Leonardo da Vinci's vision of the particular man that he would paint and that he would represent. Needless to say, this proved to be a tedious task to find just the right face. One Sunday, as Leonardo da Vinci was at the cathedral for Mass, he saw a young man in the choir who looked like Leonardo's view of Jesus himself. He had the features of love, tenderness, compassion, innocence and kindness. Arrangements were made for the young man, Pietro Bandinelli, to sit as the model for the Lord. Years went by and the painting still was not complete. Da Vinci could not find just the right face for that traitor, Judas. He was looking for a man in that apostle whose face was streaked with despair and wickedness, greed and sin. 10 years after starting the painting of the Last Supper, he found a man in prison whose face wore all the qualities of Judas for which he had been searching. Consent was given for the prisoner to pose, and then he sat as a model for Judas Iscariot. Leonardo worked feverishly for days, but as the work went on, he noticed certain changes taking place in the prisoner. His face seemed filled with tension, and his bloodshot eyes were filled with horror as he gaped the likeness of himself painted on the canvas. One day, Leonardo sensed the man's uneasiness so greatly that he stopped painting and asked, "What seems to be troubling you so much?" The man buried his face in his hands and was convulsed with tears. After a long time, he raised his head and inquired, "Don't you remember me? Years ago, I was the model you had for Jesus himself." This miserable man, Pietro Bandinelli, had turned his back on Christ and turned his life over to sin, and the world sucked him down to its lowest levels of degradation. He was a man, you could say, when we look at the weeds and the wheat of the 16th Sunday of the year that Jesus talked about, that weeds and wheat grow together, and at the end of time the harvest is made, and Jesus says, "Well, I'll decide who's on the good side and who's on the bad side." Well, as we know, saints can become sinners and sinners can become saints. So we know in that man, Pietro, that he lowered his life. We can have the greatest parents, the best education in Christianity or Catholicism, school, best secondary schools. We can have the best friends and the greatest parish and even a good parish priest, if you're lucky. Then the situation is that the person, through freedom, can still turn to leading a bad life. Whereas on the other hand, a person who's brought up with dysfunctional family and poor education, so to speak, and gets with a mob of bad people, can turn away from that life, so the sinner can become a saint, and that's what Jesus often tried to encourage people who are sinners to become saints. So on this day, when we talk about the feast of the weeds and the wheat in the gospel, and the eventual harvest for good or bad, which side we'll be on, then we are hoping that we grow towards sainthood rather than grow the other way to a lesser way of life. So I leave that with you on this 16th Sunday of Year A, over and out again from Father Greg online.